be talking about John F. Kennedy because we've mentioned him in the previous chapter because it was over civil rights. But now we're going to go back and talk more in depth about his presidency and other domestic and foreign issues that he was having to deal with.
What does the F stand for?
Huh?
What does the F stand for?
Fitzgerald.
Huh.
Okay, so let's go back and talk about the 1960 presidential election when he gets elected president. First of all, he's the Democratic nominee, and he was a Harvard graduate. He lived in Massachusetts. He came from a wealthy family, and they had a history of public service. Like his dad was a U.S. Senator, his grandpa was the ambassador to the United Kingdom. And one thing that was different about him than any other presidential nominee, he was Catholic. And to date, he's the only Catholic president that we've had, and people were hesitant to vote for him because they're like, oh my gosh, he's gonna like bow down to the Pope, and you know, America's gonna have to do what the Pope says, and we're all gonna have to become Catholic. And not the case. That was a little bit dramatic. But he's going to run against Richard Milhous Nixon, okay, who is a Republican, the Republican nominee. Nixon was very different. He was from California, and he came from a poor family, so he had to work really hard for everything he got. Not to say that Kennedy didn't work hard, but you know, Nixon had more things to overcome. He served as vice president under under Dwight Eisenhower. And the thing about them is lots of people assume that Nixon was just like super old. He was only 4 years older than Kennedy. They were both, whoever won this election would be the first president born in the 1900s, 1913 and 1917. They both served in the Navy during World War II, and then they were both elected to the U.S. Senate around the same time. But, you know, that's where their differences end. And we've already talked about the role of television in this presidential election. Oh, excuse me. Because, remember, the people who listen to the debate on the radio, they're like, oh, Nixon won. But the people who listen to it, they're like, oh, Kennedy, oh my goodness. You know, he's gorgeous. But anyhow, so I'm not going to show you this video clip just for the sake of time right now. But some of the things that Kennedy did that maybe tipped the scale in his favor, when Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested in Birmingham for his social protest, Nixon didn't really acknowledge it. But Kennedy called Dr. King's wife and was like, listen, Coretta, I'm sorry this happened. I want to do what I can to help you. And Kennedy actually, behind the scenes, he helped arrange for the bail money to get King released from jail. And because of that, he gained the support of the black community, and he won a very close election. Both of these candidates received over 34 million votes each, and they were only separated by 120,000 votes. Okay. It ended up coming down to the Electoral College. Kennedy won 303 votes in all the states in red, and Nixon won all the states in blue. But, you know, it's a winner-take-all type situation in almost every state. And so Kennedy won big states like New York and Pennsylvania. And you can look and see all this time ago, Oklahoma, we had 8 electoral votes. Woo! Not anymore. But anyhow. All right, so once he becomes president, oh, hold on, I got to show you this video. It has my favorite quote from John F. Kennedy in it from his inaugural address.
Can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
That's like his most famous quote. But anyhow. So let's talk about the Cold War, because he was president during the Cold War, and he had the need to move forward in, you know, our nuclear proliferation and fighting communism. And so one of the first things he's going to have to do is deal with Fidel Castro. Have you guys seen the movie Dirty Dancing, Havana Nights? Okay, never mind then. It's a great movie. You should watch it. Anyhow, but Fidel Castro, he rose to power in Cuba, and he's a communist. And so, you know, all the communists before, they're pretty much on the other side of the world. But now Americans are like, OMG! There's a communist 90 miles off the coast of Florida. So we got to do something about it. And, you know, in addition to that, we have this missile gap. Okay? Now, do we know exactly at this point how many nuclear missiles Soviet Union has? No. But the American government pretty much convinces Americans that we're losing, that the Soviets have more nukes than we do. And so we've got to spend time and energy and money into making sure we have more nukes than they do. So that's something we're concerned with. But Kennedy also wants to build up our armed forces because our former president, Dwight Eisenhower, he was just like, hey, spend all of our money on nukes, somebody makes us bad. End of story. But as you guys know, you can't use a nuke to handle every situation, at least not handle it well. So Kennedy wanted to have a flexible response. What that means, sorry, I keep yawning. What that means is that the United States needs to be able to fight all types of conflict, not just ones where we drop nuclear weapons. I mean, you might have to fight conventional warfare like we did World War I, you got trenches here, you gotta fight, that kind of stuff. Or guerrilla warfare. You guys seen The Patriot?
Yes.
Yeah, where you like hide behind a bush and then you pop out and it's like, Dah!
That's not
Okay.
a bush.
The sneaky, what?
That's not a bush.
Or a podium, or no, Mr. Thompson gets mad if you call it a podium, it's a lectern. If you hide behind your lectern, but anyway. Ask him about it tomorrow and be like, Mr. Thompson, is that a podium or is it a lectern?
I don't think he has one in his room.
Does he know it?
Oh,
Maybe
it's
that's
okay.
why.
He's got a story. He's like, it's, anyhow, ask him about it. All right, so he wanted us to have a flexible response, so he's going to invest money into CIA operations and other covert activities. But we gotta fight conventional warfare and guerrilla warfare. Anyhow. Okay, something kind of on a different note that Kennedy did as president was establishing the Peace Corps in 1961. And this was a really successful program, and it's still around today. What they do is the Peace Corps sends American volunteers all over the world, mostly to what we called at the time third world countries, which today we call them, maybe underdeveloped countries. But most of them were in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and we did missions of freedom. So things like maybe helping villages dig water wells or establish a hospital, provide buildings for them to do education, different things like that. But the thought process was we need to make these countries more economically and politically stable. That way, they can resist communism. And if it comes down to it, and they have to pick a side, Soviet Union or us, they're going to pick us because we helped them out. In addition, we have the Alliance for Progress. Now, the Alliance for Progress, it was not as much of a success. It was based in Latin America, trying to provide economic assistance to them. But you guys remember talking about it. Latin America, there were a lot of people there who hated us because of the way, let's just remove your leader and replace them with somebody who we like. You may not like them, but we like them. And so, a lot of people in Latin America, they were not too fond of us. Okay, now let's talk about the Bay of Pigs invasion. Here's the thing. This plan to invade Cuba, it had been put in place by the previous administration, by Dwight Eisenhower's presidency. And so when Kennedy inherits the plan, he's kind of like, yeah, let's overthrow Fidel Castro. But the thing was, he didn't want Americans to think that we were actually doing it. Okay, he didn't want the world and America to think that we were the ones who were overthrowing Castro. And that's where the problem comes in. Because relationships fell apart with Castro. We didn't have a good relationship with him. We actually broke off our diplomatic relations with him during the Eisenhower presidency, I believe. But we have this plan. And we feel like it's a pretty good one. Because there's all of these people who are fleeing Cuba and coming to the United States. They hate Castro. So the United States got this idea, these Cuban exiles, there's about 1,400 of them that we've got. Let's train them and have them invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. So we took them to Guatemala. We trained them in the jungles of Guatemala, the CIA did, and then the plan is drop them off, provide cover for them with our airplanes so they can overthrow Castro. Well, as it got closer to time, Kennedy's like, listen, the American people cannot know that we're involved in this. So they scaled back and they're like, we're not really going to provide cover for them. We're just going to drop them off on the beach. As a result, of those 1,400, only 300 of them were not captured or killed. It was a total failure. And one thing that's kind of interesting about it is, most politicians, they're never quick to take blame. But Kennedy was like, my bad, guys. Sorry. And here's the thing that's going to upset you. I forgot to print off the rest of Section 1 notes. You're going to have to write them in the margins by hand. There's the rest of this slide and then like 5 more lines. I apologize. You won't get carpal tunnel, but
Where are we ready?
just write them in the side, the margins, the back, wherever you want to. I'm sorry. So now let's talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, this took place after the Bay of Pigs invasion, and it could have been a response to that by the Cubans. So what happens is we're doing surveillance flights over Cuba. While on one of these surveillance flights, we have a picture taken, and when our intelligence starts to look at this picture, we're like, "Holy crap, guys! They are building nuclear missile sites in Cuba." And these nuclear missiles that they have there, they have medium and long range ones. They can reach almost any major city in the continental United States. They can take it out. They could take out Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, if they wanted to. So that's, cause for alarm. Okay? But we don't let the American people know about this right away. Kennedy and his advisors, it was about 13 days that they just sat in discussions trying to figure out, what do we do? Do we invade Cuba? Do we do an airstrike? Do we take out the Soviets? But every situation they could think of resulted in the Soviets nuking us. Nobody wants to get nuked. I mean, I personally don't. Maybe you guys do. I don't know. And one of the big problems is with communication. The premier of Russia, or when I say premier, their president, their leader, his name is Nikita Khrushchev. And it is very difficult for him and Kennedy to communicate with each other. Maybe writing letters or telegraph or something like that. But usually it takes quite a while for this correspondence to happen. And by the time you hear from the other guy, we have a new development and everything you might have gotten from him is already obsolete. Plus, have you guys ever had somebody, you send a text message and they misunderstand your tone or the context you say it in? You'd write, let me erase my healthcare stuff from math. So you write a text message that says, yes. Okay? Maybe my husband sent me a message that says, is dinner ready? And I put, yes, good grief, it's ready. Why do you have to keep asking me? Or maybe it's yes, we're having chicken fried steak tonight. Come on home. But it's hard to interpret which yes that is just by that. That's the same problem that Khrushchev and Kennedy are having as well, because communication, not so good. So what we end up doing is we decide to have a naval blockade of Cuba. Okay? But we don't call it a naval blockade. Blockade is an act of war. So you might write this word down. We call it a quarantine. Yeah, a quarantine, like the coronavirus quarantine. If you want to, when people get quarantined for the virus, you can say, you just got blockaded. Don't worry about it.
Should have had shares in Purell and Lysol.
I know. So anyhow, what we're doing, any ship that tries to come into Cuba, we say, hey, we want to search your ship. Either they let us or they turn around, or, something bad's gonna happen. Every ship let us search them, except for a handful of them, and they're like, oh, you know what, we don't want to go to Cuba anymore, let's go back to the Soviet Union, curiously. But anyhow, after this happens, we're going to end up with a diplomatic solution, okay? And the Secretary of Defense, he told a reporter, he said, when you report this, remember that we were staring at each other eyeball to eyeball, and they blinked first, okay? And so what we ended up deciding on was the Soviets are going to take the missiles out of Cuba. But United States, we have missiles in Turkey, and those missiles are pointed at the Soviet Union. So we have to take those out of Turkey. But we are going to wait about 6 months before we do that, because we don't want it to look like, oh, we're doing it, we caved to the communists. We're doing it because, we plan on doing it anyhow. So the Soviets, they remove their missiles. We don't invade Cuba. And 6 months later, we remove some of our missiles that we have over in Turkey.
Some?
Yes. I mean, do you think here's the thing. We're kind of hypocrites because we've got missiles pointed at the Soviet Union. And that's okay. But it's not okay for them to point missiles at us. Basically.
Well, that's because we know we're not going to launch them yet. We know we wouldn't.
I mean, I'm not saying I disagree with the policy. I think the communists were crazy. I mean, that'd be like if Kim Jong-un, or what, how do you say that? Yeah. I don't want that guy that has missiles that can reach me. That dude's crazy. Okay? But anyhow, after this, we're going to have a hotline that is created. And it's kind of like a phone system, that it's a direct, secure link between Moscow and Washington, D.C. And it's to improve communication. But history, I don't know if it's history, I'd say it's probably Hollywood, has always portrayed this hotline as like, there's a red phone sitting in the White House, and the president, he can just roll over in his chair in the Oval Office, pick it up and be like, hey, what's hanging? Nikita, what you doing? Doesn't really work like that. It's more like a fax machine. It's kind of like a precursor to a fax machine, and it's not actually in the White House. I think it's actually in the Pentagon. But it was a secure line so that they could have instant communication with each other, and it's not actually like a phone line where you can pick it up and be like, hey, what's going on? It's more like email/fax machine type thing.
Does it still work?
Yeah, they still have it. It's more advanced today. Today it's more like instant messaging, email type stuff. But it's encrypted and it's secure and all that kind of stuff. But back then it was like
Just between Moscow and Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we have them with lots of other countries too, but
Pick
hopefully,
up the wrong one.
yeah, hopefully this way we don't have a near nuclear disaster again. But then we're going to sign a nuclear test ban treaty, and it's going to be between us, the Soviet Union, and Britain, basically because we're about the only people who have nukes at this point. But we're going to ban above ground nuclear tests, which means if you want to test a bomb, you need to do it below ground. I mean, that has its own consequences and problems in itself, but at least the radiation is not drifting around giving lots of people cancer. So there's that.
Why was Britain in this?
Britain, just because they have a nuke too.
I think they had 6.
We're not trying to single out anybody, just anybody who has nukes. We're wanting them to work with us. So here's a video. We're not gonna watch the whole thing, but this is about, and there's one more slide. But this is about the Bay of Pigs invasion.
At a secret base in the Guatemalan jungle, American CIA agents had been training Cuban exiles to invade Cuba. This, they thought, would be the impetus for the Cuban people to rise up and overthrow Castro. The plan was presented to the new president, John F. Kennedy.
Kennedy felt that a plan that he had inherited, under which a band of Cuban exiles were to liberate their own country, was one he could hardly turn his back on. Well, surely the United States should help get rid of a communist dictatorship in our hemisphere.
The CIA badly misled the new president, promising him an easy victory and an end to the Cuban problem. Kennedy agreed to the invasion, but demanded crucial changes to hide America's involvement.
Anti-Castro uprising on
Just 3 days before the planned invasion, Kennedy denied any possibility of American intervention.
There will not be, under any conditions, be an intervention in Cuba by United States Armed Forces. And this government will do everything it possibly can, and I think it can meet its responsibilities to make sure that there are no Americans involved in any actions inside Cuba.
As Kennedy spoke, the invasion force was gathering. An advance wave of American bombers planned to destroy Castro's air force on the ground. The president, worried that this might reveal Washington's role, ordered the operation scaled down. On April the 15th, 1961, just 6 American bombers, disguised in the colors of the Cuban Air Force, took off from Nicaragua for a crucial attack on Cuban airfields. But with so few bombers, only 3 Cuban planes were destroyed. 7 civilians were killed.
Okay, so obviously they didn't want people to know that we were involved, but I really don't think it would have been that hard for people to figure it out anyhow, but anyhow. Let's talk about Berlin. All right, Khrushchev and Kennedy, going back to their relationship. It's pretty rocky. They met in Vienna in June 1961. So this is after the Bay of Pigs, before the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay? And at this meeting, Khrushchev told him, listen, I don't want war. If you want war, that's your problem, and you kind of need to take care of that. Kennedy's like, I don't want war either. Khrushchev said, cool. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to recognize the formal division of Germany. Because East Germany is its own independent country, and it's communist, and you're going to recognize it, by golly. And how do you think Kennedy responded to that?
No.
Absolutely not. We will not recognize it. Okay.
That car's loud.
All right, so here's the thing. West Germany is capitalist. East Germany is communist. Now remember, the capital of Germany is Berlin, and it's located right here in East Germany. But even Berlin is split. There is a West Berlin, and it is non-communist. Okay? West Berlin is a thorn in the side of Khrushchev. He hates it. Lots of people want to go there. They're stealing, skilled workers and things like that. So he doesn't like West Berlin. So, 1961, they're going to build a wall, okay, to make sure that people are not going to West Berlin. And here was the thing, in Berlin, you might go to sleep one night and the next day you wake up and there's this barbed wire fence right in the road across from you, and your neighbors, now they're in West Berlin and you're in East Berlin and you're trapped there. And then before you know it, they've built up this huge wall with concrete. It's got barbed wire all over it. And it's huge. And you can't go back and forth. As a matter of fact, if you even approached the wall, if you were in East Berlin, they'd shoot you. There's all kinds of stories of people trying to cross over into West Berlin into safety. They died.
Have you read the book A Night Divided or something like that?
I have that book.
Me too.
I haven't finished it, but I lost it. I have it somewhere, but I
Which one's
lost
the
it.
good side? All your books.
I do. What?
Which one's the good side?
West Berlin. Well, we think it's the good side. But anyhow, So USSR and in the United States, we were toe to toe on the brink of warfare. And just to give you guys some idea, this wall came down during my lifetime. Okay, it wasn't that long ago. Which, I mean, I didn't remember it because I was a little bitty when it happened, but, I mean, it came down in my lifetime. Okay, let me turn off my video.